Yesterday I'm going to talk about, because I'm with the Fire and Flood Management Unit in Juna, and we do obviously the prescribed burning in South Australia. Most of the legwork for this project is done by Damon Ezis, and he couldn't make it today, so I'm going to present this sort of work on his behalf. And it's looking at our ecological fire management strategies, and in particular in relation to the red-tailed black-cockatoos. Fire management in South Australia, Juna Fire and Flood Management Unit, we're primarily responsible for prescribed burning on public land across the state. We work with the regions, we have fire people in the regions, and they do a lot of the on-ground operational and planning stuff as well. But we also work collaboratively with Forestry SA, SA Water and the CFS on a heads of agencies agreement so that we share resources and planning and people and trucks and to go and do the burning in a more efficient way across the public land tenures. Primarily we've done burn planning in a regional sense in terms of a group of parks where we group them together with similar issues and do assessments on risks and so forth, and the planning based on that sort of regional area. But we're moving now into statewide risk-based assessment because the CFS are doing their bushfire management action plans, which covers the whole state. So they're looking at life and property issues, and we're contributing the environmental risk assets for the whole state in that process. So we're starting to think outside of parks onto the multi-tenure across different other sort of private lands and those sorts of things. So part of the project we've started this year, we've taken on a new position that's looking at the potential for private burning on private land, because there's a lot of vegetation and issues and risk that's sitting off our parks. So we're trying to get into the more landscape-wide sort of multi-tenure sort of approach to burn planning. And as part of that planning process, we do an environmental assessment for the risks, and at times there are significant issues that fall out which probably need further consideration and further sort of action and thought. So the tool that we use for that is at times called an ecological fire management strategy, and it really aims to develop a consistent approach to the fire management for that issue or species or community across all tenures, as I said, and come up with a range of sort of the issues and the solutions or strategies to manage that threat. Basically, they're trying to engage the appropriate stakeholders. We don't sort of pretend to know that we know everything, so we try and get all the relevant people in the room that have the information that we need to try and make decisions on risk. Have a series of workshop type approaches. We collate the basic species information, and with that allows us to sort of come up with a series of likely risks is in relation to fire and the use of fire, and we can outline some fire management objectives and strategies around that. And as part of that definition, we can then put some on-ground actions when we do prescribed burning and bushfire mitigation and those sort of things. We've got some good information behind how we're treating those issues. The red-tailed black-cockatoo, it's a fairly iconic species from the southeast I mean. There's a map there, so you can see that it's generally straddles the border from sort of Mount Gambier there down to Portland and up to border town, that sort of region there. That's the predicted habitat distribution there. They primarily need large hollows, eucalyptus trees. I think they prefer the dead trees more so than the live trees, but they'll use both. And often trees that are in a farmland sort of matrix as well, so rather than in native areas that aren't degraded. The problem with them, to an extent, is that their feeding resources are restricted to Eucalyptus arenacea, the desert stringy bark, Eucalyptus baxteri, the brown stringy bark, and bull oak as well as a feeding resource from summer through to the early autumn. And it's fairly exclusively on those. And the issue with these, particularly the stringy barks, is they only have good seeding years every 2 to 4 years. So the birds need to move around enough of the habitat so that in a year when the previous years is not seeding anymore, they can go somewhere else and find some more seeds. So we need to maintain enough of the habitat so that they've got a good feeding resource. And a particular issue for fire, I guess, is that it has the potential to scorch the canopy. And once you scorch the canopy of these species, they can take between 9 and 11 years to actually get to full seed set again. So they're out of action for a long time in terms of a food resource. And also fire can be an issue for the hollow trees that they nest in as well. So part of the process, it's about really talking to people. It's a communication and engagement type process. Obviously, there's a threatened species recovery team for this, which has been in place since about '96, I think. So there's a range of environmental NGOs, and as part of that threatened species team, I think there's some pretty interested local landholders that are trying to do a lot to preserve these species. So there's people with local knowledge, and also a range of sort of government agencies as well that are helping out. BirdLife Australia, Forestry SA, DELP in Victoria, because it obviously straddles the border, and we both manage with fire in that area. Juna Fire Management, the Juna Threatened Species Unit as well, and also talking to regional ecologists who may have some more localised information about what's going on with these things. So it's a process of information gathering, really. The product at the end is a fairly succinct summary of what comes out of that process. It's essentially has some basic biology down here. What are the risks that occur as a result of inappropriate fire regimes? What strategies might be employed to mitigate some of those risks in you doing prescribed burning and managing bushfires when they occur? And also what on-ground planning issues and operational issues can you do when you're out there actually conducting prescribed burns? What are the things you need to think about? So it's a very short, concise summary, but it's well stated so that it's unambiguous what needs to be done in relation to manage them in fire. So some of the strategies that come out of this one were essentially, because the canopy resources are so important in terms of the seeding and the food resource, there was a goal to keep the canopy scorch in the large distribution of the habitat to less than 15% over the past 10 years. And also, obviously, protecting nesting sites, particularly when there's sort of eggs or hatchlings in there. We would pull away and not do a burn as we assess that, part of the assessment. So we look for those cues. If there's a seeding year, we wouldn't do it either, or if there's a high sort of density of feeding adults, we wouldn't burn there as well. We pull out. So it's one of the things we assess the site-based situation with each burn. The desert stringy bark is a much smaller distribution, so we try and not burn as much as that. Burn probably, if you're going to burn some of the other areas in preference. And we keep mapping up to date where possible. The recovery team does the annual census and provides us with information about distributions of birds and pairs and that sort of thing. And as part of this process, we want to keep it adaptive. If we're doing some sort of fire management and it's not working, we need to think about that and go back and try something else at another time. In terms of implementing it and how it's going now, so this was released in 2012, I think. So it's been running a few years now. So we do an annual report of the canopy scorch targets and what's the last running 10-year sort of tally based on what we've done in that year versus the previous 9 years. The recovery team in BirdLife Australia said do the assessments, and they provide us with distribution maps, which helps us in the burn planning and that sort of stuff. As we go out, like I said, on a site-by-site basis, we assess the potential and whether the burn's suitable or not, based on those criteria around what we're looking for to try and protect the species. And we also engage with the recovery team meetings, which I think Damon said happen twice annually. So how are we doing in terms of the reporting and what's happening? In South Australia, there's about 37,000 hectares of suitable habitat in which they occupy. In the last count that Damon gave me, there's about 6% that burn over the last sort of 10 years, which is sort of well below the 15% we're after. Mostly forestry land in the southeast. They've got a lot of native reserves as well as their plantations, and they do sort of rotational burning in there. That 6% will be an overestimate, so it's actually going to be less than that because forestry have reported the size of the block where the burn occurred, not the actual size of the burn. So the burn's not usually the whole block, it's part of the block, but they're reporting the size of the block. And also, unlike Victoria, who has stacks of money, we don't have the resources to go out and actually do a full canopy assessment for the whole burn size. So when we report that it was 100%. So, and it's likely there's going to be some patchy burning in there, so that will be an overestimate. So I think in terms of maintaining canopy scorch at a good level, we're doing okay in the scheme of things. Victoria, who are much more vigorous at burning and have been so for a number of years, since 2009 particularly. But thankfully they've gone away from their 5% burning target, so hopefully they'll be able to manage things a little bit better. They're at 22%, so they're obviously above the 15%, but apparently they're trialling ways of trying to get the intensity out of the way they burn, so I assume that's through later season burning and perhaps removing some of the fuel in those systems so the intensity is reduced, but I don't know how well they're going with that. So that's pretty much the summary of the process. It really is talking to people. It's an expert elicitation process, trying to work out what the risks are and proposing some strategies and management approaches to look after it. So we've released these sort of strategies for this range here on the right, the left I mean. As you can see, they're mostly threatened species, but there can be a threatened issue or an issue that's important as well. So, for instance, smoke taint. If we burn in the autumn and smoke settles across a vineyard when it's at the last stages of ripening, it can provide an unsavoury taste to the grapes. So we try and avoid that with a range of strategies. And the next steps for us we're in collaboration with BirdLife Australia now to provide 6 more strategies for threatened mallee birds. These 6 here, they're underway. There's 2 PhDs, or I think there's 2 people who are doing 3 each, and we're collaborating with them. And also a range of other things on the card, and those complicated orchids are there as well, and as somewhere in our thought processes. Okay, I'll leave you with this little image. I was sort of thinking that in the scheme of things, this could be like a field of dreams. That sort of manage it well and they will come, but then I thought there's a number of kangaroos and stuff there, and he could be saying, come on, let's eat all the green picks. So maybe it wasn't as good as I thought when I put the image up there, but thank you very much.